Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non-technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. How do we make working relationships between engineering and business stakeholders really work, especially when it comes to high-stress common friction points like estimation? In this week's interview, I speak with James Rohrbach, a multiple-time tech entrepreneur, CEO, and investor who has experienced both good and bad relationships with his engineering teams. This interview is a look inside the mind of a business stakeholder as James shares his perspective on what makes for good working relationships across specialties, how to foster good communication, and a deep dive into estimation as one of the most common sources of friction between business and engineering. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, excited. So let's start. Maybe can you share your background a little bit, and then we can use that as a jumping off point, or if that doesn't work, I have some questions that we can dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a tech entrepreneur. I identify as a for-profit, mission-driven entrepreneur. I've worked mainly in education. My first business was called Gulliver. It was a kind of like a TripAdvisor platform for college study abroad programs, helping people to have international experiences. I sold that back in 2010. Worked for The Acquirer, a large ed tech company called Noodle, and a sister company called 2U for a little bit. And then I joined a venture studio and designed a healthcare business. And then I bought an existing brick and mortar language school called Fluent City, which was kind of like a Berlitz for the 21st century. And the vision was to turn it into a General Assembly style platform for the liberal arts. So I was an English major in college. I loved the arts, and I wanted to provide photography classes and culture classes and things like that. Ran that for that actual thesis didn't work, so we ended up just trying to build the best language school that we can, and ran that for a number of years, and ultimately sold our technology, which was some nice natural language processing tech that we built to create curriculum, to Newzella, and then the tutoring platform to a multinational called Cricket. And now I'm an investor and advisor in a number of different capacities.
So through that, you have probably worked with a variety of different engineers and engineering departments. Can you kind of share some examples of the best working relationships you've had with engineering and what made them good?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I candidly, I think that the first, when I first began my career, I mean, when I started Gulliver, I was 26, maybe something like that, and I started it in 2008 as a solo founder with no technical background. I made every single mistake in the book, and one of the mistakes that I made there was, I really had no idea how to evaluate, hire, or work with technical people. And I was really lucky in that the people that I hired there were really nice. I would say, enthusiastic about the mission, and nice and patient with me as I got up the learning curve. And what was so good about that experience was, I could just be honest about all the things that I didn't know. And one of the things, as an aside, that I'll say that I did even before I started that business, and Kevin, I realize this is a little bit of a tangent from your question, but I do think it's relevant. Before I started Gulliver, I was like, well, I don't know, anything about tech really. I'd been a consultant prior to that, and so I found a friend of a friend who at the time was, I forget exactly what his role was, but a senior product person at I think it was at Facebook, and this was back in 2007 or 8. So in the early days when Facebook was really growing very, very quickly, and I asked him if I could buy him a coffee and if we could sit in a room with a whiteboard for like 2 hours, and he could just give me the basics, like what is a tech stack, what are the different layers of the tech stack, how do they work together, like how do I even have the initial language to talk to engineers and to understand what my own needs are. And that was a launching point for doing a bunch of research on my own, just to kind of get up to speed. So one relationship that was really productive, to go back to your question, was to work with engineers who really got it at that point. And then another example that was really effective was when I was running Fluent City. And we had a small but really wonderful tech team there, also really passionate about the mission and what we were building and really committed to that. And what was so nice about that is that we were really co-creating the technology that we ultimately sold to Newzella. And it was a combination of kind of the academic and curriculum teams saying, here's what our needs are that would make something, build something differentiated. Here's the technology side saying, here's what's interesting and possible and at the cutting edge of technology. And here was me with the business side saying, here's what's actually going to be, viable and interesting commercially. And that kind of connection, collaboration, cross-functionally was extremely productive.
Yeah. Well, and that meshes some with my experience. The best places that I've worked have that kind of collaboration between expertises. Let's dig a little bit deeper on that. Are there any particular tactics or approaches that you found effective either for you or that you saw in your technical teams or even the sort of product expert teams that made that communication and that collaboration really tick?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the biggest thing that I feel like was always something, and at the time I wouldn't say that I could have articulated it like this, but in retrospect I think it was very clear, is that the working relationships were productive when all the stakeholders were grounded in the question of why, and were approaching the conversation with kind of an open-mindedness that your why might be different than somebody else's why. So, I might have, from my perspective as the business person, a commercial need to say, well, we need to build this or design it this way because X. And that X might be, it's the most profitable, or it's going to be the fastest growing, or it's got the highest addressable market, or it's going to be the most attractive to investors or acquirers. There could be any number of reasons. And similarly, the other stakeholders in this example, technology, might say, well, I want to build it this way or build something different, and here's my why. We don't have the resources to build this other thing. This thing isn't that interesting. Like we have this new technology that would be highly differentiated. And, I think if like looking forward, I would want to ground even more of our conversations in this kind of like first principles. What are the unspoken assumptions driving, why you have the position that you have, to really get to, and then to find common ground from there. And when that's not there and people are just saying, well, this is this is what we need to do without context, that's when the conversations get unproductive.
Totally. So have you ever been in a situation where that was happening? And what tactics or questions or other things did you use or did you see someone else use to get it back into that productive space?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that has been helpful for me in my career is that I have spent so much of my career working in kind of mission-driven businesses, and that was always a very helpful kind of like true north to come back to. Is this really going to be helping people learn, helping people achieve the educational outcomes or the life outcomes that they desire? Is this aligned with the mission of our organization? Is this aligned with the type of thing that we want to build or put out into the world? And that was always my go-to, either explicitly or kind of implicitly and subtly. In the event when temperatures were dialed up or there was misalignment, it was trying to come back to what are we really trying to do here and why. And then once you could kind of reestablish the kind of overarching organization-wide why, then you could go to the, okay, now let's talk about for this particular project,
Yeah, I like that.
I will say that one of the hardest, the place where I've seen this work the least well and where I think it's the hardest is around estimations and deadlines.
That is a huge source of friction. Yeah.
Right. It honestly, it's probably the single biggest source of friction that I've experienced in my career between business and technology, not just in my own organizations, but in the organizations of companies that I'm invested in or that I advise.
Yeah. So let's follow that thread then. So when it comes to estimations, estimation is hard, right? And I know there's
extremely hard.
There's all sorts of questions about, do we actually need this? What level do we need? What precision? So first, let's maybe ground ourselves and you can share from your perspective why estimation is important, why it's helpful. And then maybe we can step back into a little bit more about, okay, given that it's going to fail because it's really hard, how can we best mitigate that? What tactics have you found or seen to be really effective and helpful to you as the stakeholder in this?
Totally. So, I think that from a business perspective, the reason that estimations are important is because deadlines are real, and deadlines are real. Even if there's not a oh man, like this is going to get deployed to a bunch of students because on the beginning of the school year, which is the day after Labor Day, and so if this isn't working, the whole thing's, we can't go live. That's like a real deadline. But there are also deadlines that I think in the eyes of a non-business stakeholder can be perceived to be not real, but that actually are and can be equally critical for a business. And so, a lot of what my job as a CEO is I say my job I have three components: set the vision, always make sure there's money in the bank, and hire and retain great people. And the particularly for all of those, but particularly on the always make sure there's money in the bank, the way that you do that is by making commitments and then delivering on those commitments. And that can either be an investor where you say, here's what our roadmap is. I'm going to continue to check back in with you and demonstrate progress against that so that you have conviction that we can execute towards our next raise. Or it can be a client where we say, we're not ready for you yet, but we're going to have this prepared by X time. And making those commitments and then delivering on them is not just about, oh, well, we missed it, it's not a big deal, or, oh, well, we said this thing, but it's just words, there's no actually exogenous condition. That's what builds the conviction and the momentum in the third-party stakeholders that actually power your business, whether by providing revenue or providing investment capital. So that's why they're important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you need to deliver on deadlines because that's what builds trust. So even if it's not driven by, I have to sell, the school year is starting. I need to be able to tell this investor what to expect and then deliver on that so that they will give us money so that we can keep operating.
Exactly.
Now, as we said, estimation is really hard. And
so hard.
Especially in a new team, you're often going to get it wrong. So how do you balance and mitigate against that? What have you seen to be effective there? Or what helps you the most as that business stakeholder?
So I think, first off, I think this, Kevin, my macro theme on this is that, it takes two to tango. The advice that I have, or my perspective for technologists, is the same as it is in many cases for business people. It requires a deep, strong communication, empathy, and kind of a deep open-mindedness to understand the perspective of the other person. So what I often tell business people when they're complaining to me about a missed deadline or whatnot, is I say, hey, remember the last time you built a financial model and you're like, oh yeah, I'll have this done in an afternoon, and then 2 weeks later it's done? Everybody's bad at estimating because it's extremely difficult to do. One, it's hard to do because humans can't predict the future. And two, it's especially hard to do because when you're building something new for the first time, the amount of stuff that comes up that you can't predict and that's going to get in the way, and the more complex it is, the more risk there is that those things will arise. And to your point, when you're dealing with multi-stakeholders, now you have a whole team that's working on it. The idea that you can estimate with accuracy is, I think, unless you have a track record of doing so in the exact type of environment that you're working in, is I think fundamentally false. And it's not just engineering teams and technologists who get that wrong. Business people get that wrong all the time too. And I think it's important to approach those conversations with the sense of, estimating isn't just difficult for developing products and technologies. Estimating is difficult for basically doing anything. Okay, so now you establish that as like the baseline of understanding, and then you have to talk about, all right, well, let's do the best that we can, and then build an enormous amount of buffer on top of that, and then stay very, very closely aligned on it. Because, and it really takes kind of like all three of those pieces. And I've seen this go wrong by not having all three of those pieces in lots of different ways. So if you just say, well, we don't know, so we're not even going to try to estimate, we're just going to say it's going to be, 3 months, then you haven't actually done, any of the thinking really at all to try to articulate, like, should it be 3 months, or maybe it's going to be 6, like let's do some initial scoping here. Then you obviously have to add buffer. And, I've done some work in real estate and in construction, that you'll add a contingency that's maybe 10 or 20%. But, when you're talking about developing a product, like your contingency buffer might be 2x, it might be double the time that you thought it was going to take you.
Totally.
And so it's critical that you're intellectually honest about that. And you know what? That might be a really hard conversation. Because the business person may say, I understand, but like we're going to run out of money in 6 months. And so if we don't get this thing live and start to get some customers on it, like we don't have 6 months. But the answer to that conversation isn't then, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to tell them it's going to be 3 and we'll do the best that we can. It's like, okay, or like maybe we'll get lucky this time and like not have to use the contingency budget, because like when does that ever happen? It's like, okay, well then let's collectively scope this way down.
Yeah.
And let's agree on what the true minimum viable product's going to be, and really go with that. And if we find in this amazing place that we can build more than that, like wonderful, but like let's not take that as the base case. And then it's about deep communication.
I think that is really important, right? That what you've highlighted there, which is, business stakeholders are always going to want more.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, we're on the same team. we're needing, and if it's unrealistic to get to what we are trying to get to in the time we need to, everybody on board needs to know that, to understand that, and to reassess what is realistic that has a possibility of success and getting us to where we need to be.
Exactly. And it's just what you said about being on the same team that is, I think, so critical. And, honestly, most of the time that I've seen this play out, even in good dynamics, you are walking away with the feeling of like, well, we'll try our best, and like we've done our best to estimate, and you never know. And this time I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic, and I understand the business constraints are what they are. So we'll just see, and I think if I could rewind the clock and what I hope to do going forward is just try to be more intellectually honest about that, and be as build in as much, be as rigorous as I can be with myself and with my business stakeholders on what really the minimum viable product is, what we can solve with vaporware, what we can solve through testing and interviews, or just like pure like things that don't scale, kind of like labor, because I've now seen so many times that the business desire to just, to your point, get as much as you can, just is the wrong instinct, actually, given the realities of building something new.
Yeah. So you have come to this insight through pain.
A lot of pain.
I think on the engineering side, we always want to build a great system. We want to build something perfect. There's some pain to develop too there around, okay,
For sure.
What is really the minimum viable thing, and how much can we get away with doing things manually when we know that just given a few more weeks we could automate that.
Totally.
But how would you think about, say you're coming into a company and you have gone through this experience of pain, or maybe it's an engineer who's been through this pain. They worked at a startup and they weren't able to deliver, and now they know, okay, I have to do it. How would you start that conversation?
Well, this is part of the reason that I was so happy to join this podcast, and I'm so happy about the work that you're doing, because I think, I would love to be able to come into an organization and say, hey, everybody, we're all going to kind of agree on a set of first principles. And one of those is everything always takes a lot longer than you think. To make a business successful, you have to, get the minimum thing out the door over and over again. That's hard for everybody to do. It's not just technology. It's not just business. And so we're all going to be kind of, continuously asking ourselves and asking each other, does it really need to be this way? Is there a way to scope it down further? And just kind of instantiate that in the culture in a really deep way. And it's a really easier said than done, because there are language and culture gaps between different functions, and especially between the business functions writ large, whether it's marketing, sales, marketing, sales, finance, operations, and the technology and engineering arms. And so, I know I've been in situations where I've said, this is really important, or let's all aspire for this. But the way that gets translated, it can just mean something very, very different. And it's the same thing. There are times when I've been working with my, technology leaders, and they've been telling me something, and I've been like, I'm trying to hear, and I think I'm hearing, but I feel like it's kind of like muffled, like the peanuts, like parents. It's like, so it's only like a little bit of it's kind of like filtering through, but it's not because I'm dumb. It's not because I don't care. It's just because we're coming from different perspectives and from a different knowledge base that allows us to understand only partially what the other person's trying to say. And so that's why I think it's about that third point I was mentioning on estimating. It's about this kind of continuous communication. What exactly are we building now? Why exactly do we need this? Are we sure this is minimum? Are we sure this is required for the customer? Are we sure this is required for our technology team? I think that and that's the best you can do. And they're still going to be wrong a lot of the time, but you just have to be continuously talking.
Totally. Let's talk about that communication gap, because that's something I've seen a lot as well. Have you found any strategies or tactics that have been helpful for overcoming that gap?
I have a lot of respect for people that sit at the intersection, that are kind of the hinge people. Whether it's a technical product manager, or somebody of that nature, or an engineer who has also been on the business side, or got an MBA, or there are lots of different ways that you can kind of have that. We had somebody at one of my companies who came from an academic and kind of curricular background, but then also really got immersed and became a real data scientist and technologist. And her ability to kind of translate business needs to technology and vice versa was, I think, really, really helpful. And I don't think that there's any. I think that should be seen. I know it is, but maybe less so in smaller and startup organizations, as like a critical skill and a critical piece to a successful organization, is just accepting that the kind of translator role adds a huge amount of value.
Totally. So what made those translators so effective? What did they do? If I were someone who wanted to become a translator, what would I need to practice?
Sure. So in this particular person's case, she came from let's call it a business writ large background, and then decided she wanted to become, more of an engineer, technology person, a data scientist, but, who's also programming. And so, she took it upon herself to really immerse herself and to learn those new skills. And so she ended up sitting next to, our development team, and doing a bunch of just learning on her own, and learning by doing things, by getting her own hands dirty in a really admirable and, diligent manner to be able to then have both perspectives that she could bring to bear. If you're coming from the other perspective, if you're an engineer that's like, hey, I want to be able to expand out and play this kind of facilitator, role in a business context, it's the exact same thing, just in reverse, right? It's let me go proactively find, we weren't telling this person to do this. She's like, this is where I want to take my career. And so she went out and she did it, and it was amazing. And man, I know that as a leader, if somebody came to me and raised their hand and said, I really want to develop, I'm an engineer, and I really want to develop the skill of being able to understand business requirements better, and what that mindset of the business functions are, so that the technology team can be more effective and we can be more aligned. I mean, I would be like, you're my new best friend. I'm going to take you to all of the meetings. I'm going to give you a ton of incremental time to just, get you up to speed, to answer any question that you have. I'm going to find interesting roles for you to have because, one, I love that you're doing that, and two, it's going to add so much value to the organization.
I love that. All right. We've talked a lot about what people can do that's good. Let's actually step back and look at this from another perspective, which is, can you share maybe some of the worst working relationships or situations you've had interacting with engineering? And maybe we can dig into what caused the problems.
Yeah. So, the worst situations have always been around estimating and around deadlines. And I'll be clear that, in these examples, I take a large share of the blame for them as well, because I didn't know the things that I know now in terms of how not to set us up for failure in the first place, like we've just been talking about, and to set my own expectations accordingly, and then how not to manage the partnership better. So just to show you how bad I was, I mean, with Gulliver, we were working with, before we hired the technology team, I was working with a third-party vendor to the development shop to build like the V1 of the product. And, guess what? They were late. And and I got so upset about how late they were. And we had one of the most unproductive meetings of my career, sitting in their conference room with me just being like, what the heck, guys? Like, how could we be so late on this? And then being like, we're doing the best we can. Like, it's going to be, we're going to keep working on it. And like, it almost became kind of like a shouting match. And that was because I was so green in terms of not knowing what to expect, and because we hadn't set up any of the strong communications, expectations, or norms that I'm talking about here. Then later on in my career at Fluent City, we had another one of these deadlines. This time we had set up a marketing campaigns around a set of deadlines around back to school season, and so it was a real deadline. And I had enough experience that all along the way I was saying to, again, a third-party development firm, hey, it seems like we're going to be late. It seems like we're not going to be on track. And so I was just kind of was saying that consistently through the conversations, and the counterparty was like, no, like we got this. It's all going to be fine. And I thought that at the time, my thinking was, well, it's their responsibility. Like, they're adults. Like, if they say they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And, I'm raising the issue for them, but I'm not going to try to do their job. And I was like, that must be sufficient, right? And, the best thing to do, right, is to underpromise and overdeliver, so to beat your deadline or to build more. You never want to overpromise and underdeliver, which is it's just always the nightmare. But like, the worst thing you can do is to underpromise and underdeliver. So like, I'm going to tell you we can't do all this, we can only do this, and then I'm still going to be late. And that's what happened here. And it was like one of those days where, like, the day that we were launching, like, everybody was in a room, like, people who didn't know the first thing about anything, like, trying to like change copy on the website. It was like frantic and chaotic and terrible. And that was because in that situation I had just said, like, well, I see. It was like the train is about to, run into this wall, and I'm just saying, well, the conductor will fix it. I see it's going to happen, and I'm telling him, and he's not doing anything differently, so I guess he's going to figure it out. Whereas, obviously what I should have said, and the conversation we should have had, is much earlier, hey guys, I know that you think that this is going to work. Can we please get into the details of it in a higher level of fidelity than we have, to really understand what your thinking is behind that. And then even after they say that, say, look, I get that, and that's great, but just for my own peace of mind, I'm going to make the call as the business stakeholder that I'm going to scope this way down. Because I just don't want to take the risk, and it's my risk that I'm taking, and it's my call, and so I'm going to say, I know you think that you can get all of it done, but just to be safe, let's just commit to this, and to enforce that, and then to have checked in along the way, and I didn't do that, and the ways I did it were too late.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple of things here, and I'm imagining, you know, an engineer on that team may well have been thinking also, hey, we're not going to hit this. And there was a conversation with the leader, the manager of the team, and they're like, yeah, we're going to hit it. So, if you are an engineer on a team and you think this is not going to happen, raise the flag.
Totally.
Raise the
Totally.
flag. But then don't just stop with that. Don't throw it up in the air and say, we're not going to hit this, so we're not even going to try. It needs to be a conversation about, okay,
Exactly.
if we can't hit this, what is the subset that will still deliver value?
Exactly. And, I think that there is a it's human nature to not want to face bad news, in many cases. And we like to be optimistic and to think everything's going to work out, even in the face of like enormous, consistent evidence to the contrary, And, I think that that's a real skill and aspect of professional maturity, that anything you can do to accelerate and not be, the slow learner that I was, and just say, better to face it as soon as possible, than to hope it's all going to be okay. It's just going to lead to less pain.
So, how do you balance that with also trying to get as much done as possible? Because one concern that I've definitely both had myself, but also heard a lot from business stakeholders is, oh, if we set the timelines, we pad them all out, they're going to sandbag.
Totally. Well, and that's what I mean about the worst thing is under promising and under delivering. And that is, I think, if you're the builder on this deadline. So, Kevin, if you said, hey, I'd like a new financial model for my business, and I scope it way down and I say let's add an extra month, and then I still don't get that to you, that stinks, and I don't ever want to be in that position. And so I think that there's a, from whoever it is that's actually doing the work in that situation, I think there needs to be just a personal commitment to, that's not like if I feel like I've been given the respect and I've been heard and we have set up a reasonable scope with a reasonable amount of time, then it is my responsibility to do everything I can to hit that and to communicate and to make sure that my counterparts know that that is my plan. Know that if I need to work extra hours, I'm doing that. Know that I understand that as a buffer that I'm going to try to not absorb all of. Know that often the last 20% of a project takes 50% of the time. It's my responsibility to know those things and to communicate them to my team, just as it's my counterpart, the business stakeholder's responsibility to hear, to give me a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of buffer to complete something. And that requires really deep trust, which is where the communication, and the planning really comes in. And even the best organizations are not always going to get it right. Oh, crap, we just landed this big contract. We got to build this thing now. How are we going to do it? But, it's just being a parent or having a partner, you're not always going to be your best self. That doesn't mean you're always a terrible partner or parent. But it's that daily work of building that trust. So, yeah, I've seen that a lot, that fear of sandbagging. And, I think it's the business stakeholder side to check that impulse, but also to ask their engineering partners to approach it with that mindset. And it's the engineering team's responsibility to do so.
Let's talk about trust for a minute. So we've talked about one way that at least you build trust with the outside of saying what you're going to do and then delivering on that. And I think that is a phenomenal way as well for engineering teams to build trust with their business partners, right? Say what you're going to do, deliver on it. Say what you're going to do, deliver on it. Make that consistent over time. Are there other tactics that you have seen effective for building that relationship and trust?
Yeah. So I just want to reemphasize again, I always find values alignment to be really an important way to do that, to know that whatever the values are, to be clear about what those are in the organization and for you personally, and to be upfront about them. The other thing, and I think this is so hard and complicated, but trust is like fitness. It's really hard to gain and it's really easy to lose. And I have felt I have worked really hard in my career to be able to build trust and not lose it. And I have not always succeeded at that and done the best job because it's really hard and because it's you're never going to be perfect. So one of the things that I tried to do was I tried to be as honest as I possibly can all the time. And when you set that standard for yourself, you realize how often you're telling little kind of like exaggerations or white lies or convenient things. Oh, sorry, I was late for this thing because my train was delayed, when really you just missed the wrong train. You just you left 5 minutes late. The train wasn't delayed. You just left 5 minutes late, or whatever it is, And those little things I think are just bad habits that can erode trust. And the other thing that can really erode trust is creating a hostile environment when you're stressed. And so, I think people, particularly for a leader, people really key off of your moods, and people really key off of the level of stress that you're feeling about the business, and how you handle those situations is, people really hold on to those moments. And so, I have tried so hard in my career to be the best possible leader I can, the most empathetic leader I can, try to develop people as much as I can, try to think about them as people and not just, staff members, much less just line items in a P&L. People are not fungible. I really believe that in my core. And yet there's still been times when I've lost trust because I would get really angry or frustrated, or I'd just be really stressed and I'd be curt with somebody when they needed me to be, more present with them. Or just kind of convey through my body language that I wasn't available to them in a way that, they needed right then. And, those things erode trust. And you have to be continuously fighting back against them in terms of being willing to recognize when you mess up, apologize, create space for conversation about it, and move forward and kind of, and prove that you can, deliver in the way that you aspire to, in most cases going forward. And it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah. Well, and that personal emotional management is something that is such a huge part of as you rise in being a leader. And being a leader doesn't necessarily mean being the CEO of a company, right? It could be you're the most senior member on your team. Everyone's looking to you to know how to react. It could be your first management job. Whatever it is, we can't, if we just let our emotions gush all over everybody, it's harmful.
Totally. But the inverse is also problematic. And what I see a lot is people say, "Oh, I'm just gonna keep it all together here. I'm not gonna share what I'm thinking or feeling because it's not appropriate. It makes me look weak. It's for whatever reason. It's not our workplace culture." And to me, that's like equally. That's like insidious. Instead of just being like toxic in the moment, it's insidious because. How can you solve a problem? How can you address a concern if you don't know that it exists?
Totally. So how do you approach this, right? Like, you're upset. Okay, that's an emotion I'm feeling. And I want to handle it in the way that's going to be the least harmful to trust, to my team, to what have you. Yep. What would you do?
So what I would do now, and that I wish I'd done more previously, was be very honest about that and be vulnerable in a way that I didn't feel like I could and still be seen as a leader. And so, I'm just like, I'm putting myself in a position now. Let's say that, I was running a startup, and we were trying to raise money, and my number one prospect for raising money, I just had a meeting with, in which they said thanks but no thanks, and now I had no idea where our lead investor was going to come from, and we had 3 months of runway. And so I was, let's say I'd be very stressed in that situation. And, historically, the way I would think would be, well, I can't show that to the team, because that's just going to make everybody panic. And I can't tell the team exactly where that situation is, because that's just going to make everybody panic. And when they panic, people will start looking for jobs, or they'll be distracted, and we won't be able to just do the things we need to do to try to make this work. And it's also not fair to them to put some of that stress on them, because it's not their job. They're just trying to do their job. All those are like good and admirable thoughts, but at the end of the day is, when everybody knows I got the big meeting, and then I come back from the meeting and my energy is negative, everybody knows it didn't go well, And so, you can't just kind of keep that all bottled up. And you're also not always going to have a plan. You're not always going to be have the answer to things. And so I think trust is really about people trusting you to be honest with them, and to be diligent in trying to do the best that you can at your job. And so now what I would say in that situation is, hey guys, wanted everybody to know, we that meeting with that investor didn't go well. We were not going to get a term sheet from them. They were our best shot. It's now going to be harder. I'm obviously very disappointed and stressed about that right now. It's not going to change anything about what we're doing today, but I need to start thinking about what our kind of go forward plan is going to be. And you have my commitment that I'm going to do that, proactively and make it my focus over the next 48 hours. And then we're going to do a team meeting on Friday, and we're all going to talk about it. And it'll be an opportunity for me to be completely open with you about what our plan is, and for you guys to ask questions about what that means for you, or just about the organization overall. And what more can I do there?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and
anyway.
To bring this back to a previous part of our conversation, right? Estimation and communication.
Exactly.
If I'm the tech lead on a project, and I've laid out my estimations, and I'm feeling good about them, and we get along the way, and something comes up where maybe you uncover something that you thought was going to be easy is not, or something else.
Totally.
Immediate reaction is, oh shit, I feel like crap. I feel terrible. And I think our protective reaction would be, I'm going to bottle this up. We're going to try to power through. We're going to make it. But the way to build trust about it, to protect, or to kind of adjust based on that, is to come and say to your business stakeholders, to your team, hey guys, I just found something that destroys our plan. I feel really shitty about it, but we need to adjust. How do we together deal with this situation?
You are so right, and that's exactly the right kind of comparison to the analogy from my situation, to translate that into an engineering environment. And I just can't emphasize enough how hard that is, and how much I understand how hard that is, and how rare it is. What I've seen most of the time is I'll check in with somebody, and they'll be like, oh yeah, this is taking longer than I thought, but don't worry, I'm going to work all weekend. I got this. And man, I want to give that person a hug and be like, I love you, but that's not the right answer.
Totally.
And oftentimes part of the reason it's not the right answer, it's not just for their sake, but also oftentimes they'll come back on Monday and they'll be like, it's still not done, but don't worry, I just need 2 more days. I got this, and this is how everything blows up. And so, it is, in my opinion, just as important a skill as to do as it is for almost anything else in your job, to do what you just said. When you identify that issue, to be able to identify for yourself before you even communicate it. Say, oh wait, I have pattern recognition. This is one of these issues that now is going to be a real thing. This isn't just something that I can solve on my own. And then to have kind of the courage and the confidence to raise your hand and say, I found a problem. We need to revisit this timeline that we just spent so much time, developing, and that I know is so important. That's really, really hard, but it's really, really important.
Yeah. Any other tactics on sort of self-emotion management? Because as you highlight, it's this tricky thing. If you don't want to leak negativity all over everyone, you don't want to be like, this is doomed, this is terrible. It's this balance of, I'm upset, this is not great, And also, I feel like together we can solve this. Like we're channeling this negative energy towards something productive, not towards, oh, we're screwed. We're going to, we're doomed now.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would step back a little bit further and say this. There's a general concept in professional development that like you should identify what your greatest strengths are and really lean into those, right? And that's where you can have the greatest impact. And I think that what that can lead to a set of thinking of like, okay, well, this is just what I do, and as a result, I don't really need to worry about getting better at any of this other stuff. And the answer, I think, for me that I've found is that you need to hit a baseline level of competence at a set of core skills that are core to your role and to where you want to develop professionally, and then you can have like your spike. So I'm never going to be anybody's CFO, but like I'm better than the average person at finance, and I really worked hard to develop that skill because it's really core to being a successful entrepreneur and operator. Doesn't mean that I'm going to go get my CFA, but it does mean that I spent a lot of time investing in that. And I think that for anybody and for their career, but especially for people that want to be advancing as a leader in any kind of role, in any kind of function, including engineering, learning how to communicate strongly and to be able to manage your own emotions is one of those core skills. And it's going to take practice and time, just as any hard skill takes practice and time. And you're going to mess it up a lot. I have messed it up a lot, and it's one of the things that I'm better at. And this whole conversation's been about all the ways I've screwed it up over the past 20 years of my career. But that doesn't mean that like, oh, well, you just throw your hands up, And so, if you're just starting out, okay, so maybe you have one when you come to your team and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a crisis. What are we going to do? And you feel really bad the next day and ashamed because you felt like you overreacted, or you were just being too emotional, or but you say the answer isn't okay. Well, I'm never going to do that again. The answer is, okay, how do I do that again the next time in a way that I feel better, that I feel like I communicated it, the severity of it, without feeling like I was kind of like losing control of myself. It's just practice.
It is, and I think it's important to realize that it is a skill, just like a technical skill, and you can look out at who around you is doing well at that and ask them, what do you do? How do you do that? How did you do that? It's just as learnable in a lot of ways. And I think that's one place we sometimes run into trouble as, an engineer. We're so used to our sort of hard track that we forget that, all these things, they've been denigrated as soft skills. And we think, oh, that means they're fuzzy. There's nothing concrete there. It's totally false, right? Like humans
totally agree with you.
Are not as predictable as a computer, but there are patterns and you can learn them, and you can learn how to manage yourself, and you can learn how to interact with others in ways that are just as concrete as...
Amen. Exactly. I mean, and I want to emphasize that with regard to, yourself. I mean, like I know that like when I'm don't get enough sleep and I'm really tired, the way I maintain energy is I just eat continuously. That's like a mechanism that I have. I know that when I'm stressed, then my reaction is that often will manifest as frustration, not as depression. It's like there are patterns about yourself that you can recognize, and you can look. Anybody, like I've now had 20 years, but even if you're 25 and you've been in the workforce for just a couple of years, you can look back and start to see patterns of when this happens, I react in this way, and that makes me feel like that, or I get this kind of feedback. And you can just start to iterate on that and improve it.
Totally. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Was there anything else you were hoping to talk about today that we haven't touched?
I think the only thing I just emphasized that I didn't say quite as clearly, but was kind of implicit in in my earlier comments was I think that for conversations between and planning between business and engineering teams to be successful, each side needs to not just explain their why and communicate, but forgive the other side their lack of knowledge. You know, because I don't understand something or because you don't understand something doesn't mean that you're dumb or that I'm dumb. Doesn't give you the right to be dismissive or for me to be, or for me to be dismissive of your contributions. The commitment to explaining to each other and the commitment to curiosity of like, yeah, this isn't my domain, but like walk me through it. I want to sit next to you for an hour and have you walk me through it. This is a good use of time. And then the commitment to say, let me explain this to you in a way that's not, belittling or pedantic. Like that also builds trust. And there, if the Venn diagram of the amount of like shared knowledge and experience and point of view that two teams have, can start like this and then over time can get more overlapped through that kind of commitment. And that makes a really big difference. And I don't think that I historically and teams in general spend enough time, helping to make those Venn diagrams overlap more.
All right, that's it for this Human Skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.